political analyst and host of the Iran podcast. Negar, thanks for talking to us. The timing of these discussions, direct or indirect, it seems a little bit curious. I wonder what you think is behind it.
I think both sides have shown interest in talks and diplomacy, but it took them some time to sort of get to where they are because they started at very, very different sort of starting points. President Trump is the president who pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal with Iran, a deal the Iranians had already agreed to, were abiding by. He also assassinated a top Iran general. So for the Iranians, it's been difficult to sort of come to the table and sit with his envoy. On the U.S. side also, I think even though President Trump wanted this fast, it took them to figure out how to do it, who would be the mediator, the fact that Iranians want to do it indirectly, to figure out that the Omanis would be the party to do it. So I'm not surprised that it took them some time. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very late, but the window of opportunity is very small, and I think it's going to close fast if they don't reach a deal, and then they're going to be on the trajectory of conflict. So I think it's good that it's happening. However, it came about with the help of the trusted partner of both sides, which is Oman, and they've done this before.
Negar, look, I think most people would say that the fact that they are talking is likely to be a positive step, but given the respective positions, is the likelihood of a deal at all something we should seriously consider, or do both sides really have intractable positions when it comes to where they might be willing to negotiate, where they might be willing to cede ground, but where they won't?
Well, I think for the Iranians, the structure has been pretty consistent. They agree to talk about a nuclear program as long as they can keep a civilian program and have monitoring to not develop weapons, which is one of the fears in Washington across the region. From the U.S. side, under President Trump, the messaging is not consistent. There's been mixed signals. So for President Trump himself, if we just focus on him, has been consistently saying he wants a nuclear deal with Iran, a nuclear peace deal, a verifiable deal, and that they can't have a nuclear weapons program. They can't have weapons. And Tehran would accept that framework, regardless of the details. But we also hear, for example, from the National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, saying, no, they have to dismantle their entire program. Or President Trump in action has done something that contradicts his rhetoric. He has signed a memorandum of maximum pressure. He has increased sanctions on Iran. So which is it? From Iran's viewpoint, I think they're a little bit confused. If it's the president's rhetoric, if it's Steve Witkoff's rhetoric, I think that would be acceptable for Tehran to at least enter negotiations and diplomacy. But if it's sort of the more hawkish neocon rhetoric and also the action coming from the White House, I think from the Iranian side, that has been a non-starter, and they will probably continue that position.
Yeah, I think you rightly point out about the uncertainty. I wonder, from the Iranians' perspective, how seriously they will take some of the things that are being said by the Americans in the context of both the trade war, but also the negotiations going on between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine with regards to a ceasefire deal there. There is a lot of suspicion about goalposts moving, about sincerity, and indeed about whether the United States could, and particularly under Donald Trump, just shift the goalposts further down the line, renege on any terms of the deal, and demand a new one.
Well, these are absolutely important points you're mentioning, and Tehran is watching all of them very carefully, although they're not going to really impact their negotiations as far as in substance. I think the Iranians and also the Americans in the past have shown that they're pretty capable of sort of compartmentalizing these issues. Although with a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, which Iran's allies are involved in that conflict, of course, a deal with Iran will be easier and more sustainable. But I think the point you're making as far as trust, that's very important, and that's part of sort of the core or one of the key components of the mistrust of Tehran, because they're saying, look how they're treating President Zelensky, an ally. Look how they're sort of reneging on some of these deals and agreements. Look how the ceasefire in Gaza didn't really stand. So it doesn't bring the U.S. to a point that Tehran would trust them. Nevertheless, they're coming to the negotiating table. So I think this is a giant leap that both sides are making. So it's important. It's very significant. I'm watching it very closely, but it also depends on where sort of the bottom line is for the U.S. Again, is it going to be what President Trump says? Is it going to be what he did? Is it going to be what his national security advisor is saying? Is it going to be what Benjamin Netanyahu has been pushing? These are somewhat different and conflicting, and I think that's going to show us the path.
And Negar, just quickly, will the Iranians believe that they have done enough to demonstrate that they themselves are trustworthy in the eyes of both the United States and the West more generally?
I think if we look at Iran's overall track record, of course not. I mean, they're rivals, arch enemies with the U.S., its allies. But if we take sort of a particular piece when it comes to the nuclear deal, Iran was actually the party that when they signed, they abided by the deal. So sort of in recent memory, it was the U.S. who, under a different administration, different president, signed a deal with the P5+1, not just Iran, global powers, and then they pulled out of it while Iran was abiding. But of course, if you look at the big grand scheme of things, these countries have been arch enemies, rivals, their allies, and their interests in the region have been conflicting. So yes, the wall of mistrust, as they say, goes very high.
Well put. Thank you very much for that. Negar Mortazavi, who is a political analyst and host of the Iran podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.